there was this young girl who was, I mean, they were chained to the beds. I mean, chained to the beds and forced to have sex with people. And, you know, in those days, you know, you had to actually kind of declare that you had been trafficked in front of your kidnappers to be released. And there was this one girl who was, I mean, literally rocking backwards and forwards on her bed. She really wanted to leave. She wanted to escape. But these guys had told her that they would kill her family if she tried to run away. And they had to leave her there. I mean, can you imagine?
Hi everyone, I'm Petrus, and today I'm doing things a bit differently by wearing a nondescript black or polo or grey polo shirt. WorldView, of course, is a podcast where we explore everyone's perspectives on all things that can broaden our worldview. If you've watched any of my podcasts so far and liked it, please consider liking this video, subscribing, and donating on Patreon. Today we're talking with Sara Vaughan. Sara Vaughan is an innovator, positive change maker, creator of brands and companies with purpose, and she's currently the Marie Claire's Global Chief Purpose Sustainability Advisor and the host of Start Somewhere, where she talks on some of the most inspiring people that she's lucky enough to meet over the course of her work. And of course, we're lucky enough today to talk to Sara. So Sara, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's so great to see you. And I'm hoping that top is kind of like you've had that for a while. You might have recycled it, you know, kind of, yeah. And you've worn it more than 30 times, I'm hoping.
I mean, that probably is true, but you know, it's also made from sustainable materials. No, I'm just kidding. We'll get into that, and we'll talk about some of the companies perhaps that do create those products in South Africa. But genuinely, part of the reason why we're having this discussion is because it really isn't as widespread as it is already, or rather should be. But let's start off from the beginning. So I know, for example, that Al Gore had a talk. You told me that Al Gore did a talk at Unilever, which partially inspired you to talk about sustainability and especially climate change or situations that are affecting our ecology. Could you just tell me, like, how did that story start? How did you get inspired to, you know, actually actively in your companies make a difference in the way you're talking about sustainability and chief purpose?
So that's a really good question. And, you know, I think I've always grown up as a global citizen. I was actually born in Ghana, and very proudly so. I've spent a lot of time in all over the African continent, actually. You know, I've been very, very lucky. You know, I had a very kind of traveling family, if you like, and I've lived all over the world. And I think that I've always been very close to nature. I'm crazy about, you know, the ocean, swimming, stuff like that. I've even braved, you know, off the Southern Cape swimming, although it's freezing and full of sharks, so that didn't last too long. But you know, and I've always just had a huge passion for kind of animals and nature. And I think, you know, when you have that very close association, you start to notice changes effectively, and you know, like things become more, you know, like more rare. I mean, like even, you know, my dear friend, kind of Laurie, Dr. Laurie Marker, who's in Namibia, who runs the Cheetah Conservation Fund there. You know, I mean, you know, the number of cheetahs in this world, you know, would fill just a football stadium, and that's decreasing on a daily basis. So, you know, these beautiful animals that we appreciate and love are becoming increasingly more rare. And, you know, my kind of like purpose and passion really came together actually when I actually worked for De Beers, and I launched Forevermark, the diamond brand, the ethical diamond brand for De Beers. And that was a real kind of like switch moment for me, because, you know, obviously it was really relooking at how the value chain could go back into Africa, particularly after you know, the film Blood Diamond, which was, you know, clearly horrific and quite rightly showed a lot of injustices, you know, both towards humanity but also environmental degradation that was happening within the industry. And, you know, that was just such an extraordinary opportunity to create, you know, like systems levels change, you know, around something that was bought as a symbol of love, you know? and that was just extraordinary. And I really kind of, it brought together my great passions. And I also had a deep passion for sparkly things, I have to say. And it was just kind of like the light switch went off, and I'm like, this is extraordinary. What businesses can achieve in terms of good, and they can have such far-reaching impact. Still make money, which is important as a business, but can really actually kind of help the environment, and also really lift people out of poverty. And you see the example of somewhere like Botswana, which was one of the poorest countries in Africa, who've just been transformed, mainly through the diamond industry. So, that was very humbling. And then after that, I went to the Body Shop, which I'm sure a lot of you are aware of, which was just an extraordinary time, and did really found my groove in terms of activism, and again, what brands can do. And I think we'll circle back around to some of the campaigns that I did then. And then I joined Unilever, really because I had heard Paul Pullman, talking about just this amazing vision he had. And why I wanted to join Unilever was because it was so flipping big, and just so powerful in its ability to create change. And Paul did something pretty amazing. He brought all the kind of like 100 leaders together of Unilever, and this was really about focusing on a change agenda. And we had Al Gore come to speak to us, literally about kind of the state the world was in, and really speak very directly to us about what we need to do to change it. And I'll never forget that. I mean, it's kind of one of those seminal moments where I really made a vow, that this was what I wanted to do, and I wanted to use all my influence and all my time and my passion and energy to really create change in the world. Much needed change, I might add.
Yeah, and the best part about this is kind of like that, there's always the discussion, especially about climate change and other type of issues, is people kind of say, okay, but this has kind of happened before. It's natural, it's happened in the past. We've seen these type of extinction events of a lot of species happening. And the main kind of research focus on that type of narrative has always been, okay, but this is kind of unprecedented. Like, sure, this has happened before, but it's never happened at this pace, and so many species have been affected. And so they've actually become to call it the Sixth Extinction event. So could you tell us about the Sixth Extinction event, and of course, what can we do as humans to make this as natural as possible? In other words, to avoid our involvement in this way.
Yeah, well, I mean, let's not beat around the bush. The sixth mass extinction is upon us. We're in it now. And I think, even for those climate deniers, I mean, it's very real. I mean, I did a podcast actually with Paul Pullman, which will be coming out later on in the autumn. And I was sitting in France, and the hillside was on fire. Not my immediate hillside, but the one over. So I literally was keeping an eye out for black smoke, and the fires in southern France, is particularly if there's a Mistral wind, they go so fast. I mean, it's very frightening. And Paul was in the States, and he had a huge storm going on. I mean, where he was quite remote, it had a generator, but basically all the phone lines were taken out. And then, we had basically our podcast was terminated, and we were talking about climate change. And it was this really kind of like eerie moment that, we were both at effects. We were thousands of miles away, but this was very real. And, we then said, okay, let's try and kind of reconnect a bit later, if the fire didn't take over and stuff. And, I texted him and like, can we come back on? And he's like, no, the storm got worse. And then he texted me a picture of his car, and a tree had fallen on his car. I mean, that's the reality. And I think, developed countries have traditionally just been better at fixing the problem, right? But the thing is, it's so bad now that we can't ignore it. And also, I think what we're seeing is America waking up, thank God, because I think the rest of us, whether we live in Europe or Africa or Asia, have actually, or Southern America, actually have been really seeing, what's happening. But I mean, this past year has been unprecedented. And I mean, what is extraordinary is like the hurricane that just recently hit the States. I mean, they were expecting it to land in New Orleans and Louisiana, who normally are incredibly hard hit, and we all know what happened, several years ago when like New Orleans was pretty much wiped out. But it landed up in New York. I mean, over 40 people died in New York in basement flats. I mean, in New York, they are basically saying that no one can live in a basement flat. I mean, if you've invested your money in a basement flat, you're really screwed. And I think, in a way, we kind of need this to happen, because we need like centers of power to really experience this, because then they'll take it seriously. And as I said, I mean, Americans are waking up super fast. And I mean, like, I spoke to a friend who lives in Lake Tahoe yesterday. She's had to move out. I mean, Lake Tahoe is on fire. I mean, this is, so coming back to your question about the sixth mass extinction, it's not like when, it's like happening now. And, and I think what is different about this from the other extinctions is this is caused by humanity. I mean, the others were caused by mass events and the earth changing, but, this is caused by us. I mean, effectively. And, you can argue, what you like, but we're 100% responsible for this. And yes, there may be small kind of issues, but if you actually look at the fact, we've burst through our planetary boundaries, it's unsustainable the way that we live, and we have to change that rapidly, whether it's by looking at carbon footprints, buying differently, that kind of stuff. We've all got to take responsibility. And certainly, we do need governments to move, and we need to lobby them to move. We need businesses to move. It's not just enough to be sustainable. You've got to be regenerative now, and each and every one of us need to take responsibility as well. But, we can't, we need to do that in partnership, because, just a single action, I mean, is very important by all of us. And if we accumulate those actions, but we need to do it together. And I think that's my greatest fear at the moment, is like, we're not doing things together. People are arguing, bickering, NGOs are doing one thing, another NGO is doing another, but we all need to come together and really work on this and have a mega game plan to do this. But I'm really hopeful we can do this. The problem is, I think with the problem, and the upside with human beings is that we need things to get super bad before we act, right? And we have extraordinary powers as human beings and our creativity to change things and to innovate. But it's normally when kind of, excuse my language, but the shit's hitting the wall, and it's like, we could have done this a bit earlier. We've had warnings about climate change pretty much for the last kind of 50 years, and it's like, I mean, come on, like, time to wake up big time and time to hold people to account.
It's not an old problem. It really isn't. And I mean, I saw this video, I think yesterday or the day before, about the floods in New York, and somebody was literally walking through their basement flat, which had about, I'd say like a half a meter or so, or a meter perhaps, of water in the bottom. So it was flooded properly. And this person was just looking around at all the things that were obstructed, and they were walking out of it. And just as they were walking out of it, this was a security camera in the corner of the room, the wall collapsed. The sidewall collapsed and the water just came flooding in. So luckily the person was out of the room by the time that it happened. But I mean, that is, and I know, for example, that this specific, video caught a lot of people's attention in terms of the realities. Like, that person could have died there. That's what you could have seen.
I mean, this is an everyday occurrence in Southern Africa and parts of Mozambique, floods after floods. If you live in Bangladesh, this is something that you experience. I mean, if you live in some of these low-lying islands like the Seychelles and stuff, I mean, the Maldives, I mean, you're on high alert for this pretty much every day of your life. And actually, I think it's in a sense, and in Germany, I mean, just the terrible floods in Northern Europe, which were appalling, and as so we're actually experiencing what a lot of the world has experienced, and it's tragic, but I really hope that there is a waking of deep empathy, and actually it's not happening kind of over there where you can kind of blindly sort of not, go, oh gosh, that's awful, but we're all in this together. We've only got one planet, and and actually, as Paul Parman says, you cannot have healthy people living on an unhealthy planet. We have to fix this.
Yeah. And like you said, we have a lot of power as individuals in terms of the purchasing power and decisions we make to live sustainably. But also, as you mentioned, companies like Unilever have this due to the immense size, they have this reach and capability to make a big difference. And a lot of people, kind of shunt away their personal responsibility by saying, hey, but, the 100 companies worldwide are responsible for 70% of the pollution that we have in terms of the carbon footprint. So they're kind of like saying, this is not my problem. Evidently, these big companies have this problem. But there really is a combination of the two. But in this case, I mean, we're seeing so much inspiring type of messages, like, for example, Unilever, like you said, trying to, make an active difference. So being one of those big companies are trying to make an active difference, but also at the same time, smaller companies, other incentives. So one of them I specifically want to talk about that you're involved with is a Plastic Planet. And of course, researching for this podcast, I looked at the I looked at the website, and I watched the videos and everything, and I saw this was impartial to using plastic as a sustainable, or rather as a recycling tool for making clothing. But it looked like it had so much more articles and topics that actually covered besides that. So could you just give us a bit of a lowdown? What type of problems this Plastic Planet trying to solve?
Yeah, so a Plastic Planet actually came to me, after I left Unilever, I took some time out. I had worked nonstop, and I needed to just spend some time, for me, if that makes sense. So one of the things I actually did was I went to India, and I went to a very beautiful place in Kerala, and then I went to stay with some wonderful friends who live in Trivandrum, and I was on the coast there. And I was paddleboarding, and it's just stunning. And I just started noticing the plastic. And I went to Cambodia, and I got up early. I love walking on beaches. It's one of my most favorite things to do. And every morning, there were people sweeping the beach for all the plastic and burying it. And I'm sailing in Croatia, plastic, and I just realized that there is nothing untouched. And a lot of this plastic was branded. I mean, let's face it, it was very easy to work out where the plastic had come from. And I love water, and the ocean, and I was like, holy moly, we are in deep shit. And then I went back to London. And I went to an event, and I was introduced to the very amazing Sian Sutherland, who I've actually done a podcast with. And Sian also comes from a kind of big business, she's like one of the most entrepreneurial and amazing women I've ever met. And she and her dear friend Frederica Magaston were really on a mission to kind of, stop plastic pollution. And it was kind of one of those meetings. A dear friend called Beatrice Aiden, who's a journalist, was like, "Oh my God, you two have to meet. I mean, all you do is both chew my ear off about plastic." And yes, so I joined a Plastic Planet. I was intending to take some time off, but I was just like, I have to help and have to get involved. And what started was this extraordinary kind of movement to really kind of help prevent plastic in supply chains, and also show what was possible, because it's not enough just to point the finger and go, you're wrong. That's very unhelpful, I find, just generally, and normally ends up with people just being more entrenched in their viewpoint. But if you can actually be really helpful, then that's great. And one of the first actions we actually did was to try and talk to the supermarkets about doing plastic-free aisles. Now, we were like, well, in most of the world, you can shop gluten-free and dairy-free and, sugar-free and stuff like that, but you can't shop plastic-free. And they all thought we were complete lunatics. It was very interesting. We went to see all the big kind of retailers in the UK, and they were all like, on a personal note, like all the sustainability chiefs were like, I'm kind of worried about my plastic, recycling bag is huge every week, and it's like, well, yes, but you in your role, you need to do something about this. And what we discovered was that plastic wasn't being recycled. I mean, what was actually happening often, particularly in the UK and in the Western Europe and in America, is that what plastic was collected would actually be shipped to Mozambique or China and go into landfill, and they would tick a recycle box. Now,
Yes.
I mean, that is just outrageous. And, like, we're talking about sending to countries who couldn't deal with their own, like, waste problem, let alone deal with a whole load of Western, like plastic. And we're not talking like nice plastic. Like, we're not talking about, I mean that as a bit of a joke, but we're not talking about like perfectly rinsed kind of, like bottles going over. We're actually talking about, things like diapers, used diapers. And, I saw this firsthand when I was in India, near Trivandrum. I actually saw like just an ocean of plastic bottles near the sea, and it was just a landfill site. And I mean, those were Coca-Cola bottles. And I just was, plastic degrades, it particularly with sun on it. You put it in, in India, I mean, all that sun and possibly some of that salt water is going to leach into the oceans. And, it's not just a case of like plastic getting into the oceans and being swallowed and ingested by marine life. This stuff is everywhere. I mean, it's everywhere. It's in what we eat. It's in our air. It's in our soils. I mean, and this is the problem. And I also spoke to someone called Dr. Sara Vaughan, who's amazing. And effectively, our ingesting this plastic is causing huge, I mean, even if we can't do it from the environment, we need to do it for ourselves. I mean, fertility rates have dropped by half in the last 50 years as a result of our ingesting microplastics. I mean, that is shocking. It doesn't even just lower fertility rates. For those fetuses that are born, we're seeing in animal kind, a lot of them are being born hermaphrodite and things like that. It changes sex. I mean, it does all sorts of horrific and appalling things, So this isn't just a kind of like, a plastic littering problem. This is, a human health, future of humanity issue, but also a future of species issue. So we really need to tackle this. So A Plastic Planet is really, serves as an educator, but also gives people options. There's a brilliant materials library that if you're kind of thinking about like, I'd really like to try and go plastic free, but I have no idea where to start, you can actually look it up, and there's a brilliant directory. And also they offer a, you can get a plastic-free mark as well, which is great. So people can actually kind of opt actively to buy your products on the shelf. And, that's where, a lot of people don't want to buy plastic, but they're faced with an ocean of plastic when they walk into their local supermarket. And that's a really good way to shop. So, yeah, I mean, extraordinary work going on there. I would really advise everyone to look at aplasticplanet.com and see what they can do to kind of, champion and challenge and really make those choices in their lives. Yeah.
Yeah, and I've seen so many, like, it has so many great resources in terms of solutions to not only where to buy plastic free, but how to better get rid of plastic, or how to recycle it in a way that where it's actually going to go. Because I definitely have heard the story. I think it's a percentage of the US's plastic waste gets sent to Indonesia to be recycled there, and then after the point at which it's been delivered, it pretty much isn't ever followed up in terms of how it's recycled and how it's used in the way that it's sustainably done.
It's all burnt. And like either way, it causes extraordinary environmental and human damage, because if you're burying it, it leaches into the soil throughout. If you burn it, all those particles go into the air, and a lot of Western governments are moving towards incineration. But the fact is, these incinerators emit extraordinary, like, small particles, microplastic particles, which damage human health. And actually, if you look at the kind of health profile of populations around incinerators, it makes for some very, very scary reading, actually.
I mean, we already have this type of scenario in South Africa. There's very, very clear examples of exactly what you're talking about. But in terms of reusing the plastic, I've seen some fantastic innovative ideas, like people that actually shred up the plastic into thinner fibers, and then shred it and shred it and shred it until it's pretty much weavable. It's like a type of a cloth, and then they take this cloth and then actually make clothes out of it. So there's a way in where you can actually make a very useful, sellable product for it afterwards. We have one of these companies, which name, unfortunately, I can't remember now, but a friend of mine only buys their clothes because he just absolutely loves it because it's comfortable. And he also says, like, man, why wouldn't you buy nice clothes if it's also sustainable? It's kind of a best of both worlds. And in this type of, same line in the fashion sense, I know you're also involved with the fashion Avengers.
Yeah.
So could you just tell us, before we get into that discussion, could you just tell us what that is and how they also aim to solve, or rather, work on climate change?
Of course. So Fashion Avengers is an amazing movement, effectively, of kind of leading fashion influencers who are really driving to support the global goals and, create a tipping point within the fashion industry. Because if we can make the global goals fashionable, we've really won. And, I mean, there are various differing statistics, but pretty much the fashion industry is like the third most polluting industry in the world. And, each of us buy clothes or borrow clothes or whatever. So, we've got an extraordinary kind of ability to be able to influence the system. Through what we wear and how we show up. So, the founding kind of partners, if you like, of the Fashion Avengers, the Project Everyone, which is Richard Curtis's organisation with Gail Galley. And then we've also got Burberry on board, Marie Claire, Pangaea, which is an extraordinary brand. I mean, they're all extraordinary. So, it really, really is, amazing. And the photographer Rankin is involved, and the amazing model and activist Noella Corsaris Mazunka, so it's very, very exciting, kind of what we're doing. And we're all committed to, yes, turning the fashion industry around and creating a real movement for change. And I think, that's so important. And it's also one of the things that I've really realized is that, a large company, however big, like Unilever, can make a lot of change, but we actually need whole systems change. We need whole industries to change to create kind of movement. And, I realized that also with Plastic Planet, because all the supermarkets were kind of going, well, yeah, we get it, but we really need the government to regulate the change. And we're just like, come on. Like the government has got other fish to fry. I mean, so we need industries to voluntarily want to change and with kind of real leadership, because, that way you can change supply chains, you can, you can really do it at mass scale. So that's what it's about. But to be honest, anyone can become a fashion avenger. And if you want to find out how, you can go to the globalgoals.org website. And what we're encouraging people to do is to take a photograph of themselves wearing something that has been upcycled, borrowed, reused, whatever, and to take a photograph of themselves and post it with hashtag Fashion Avenger on it. So, there's some really inspirational kind of videos on the website as well. But we're really looking to do kind of big industry moments as well around kind of the UN General Assembly. So we're getting quite a lot of the retailers in New York together who are very excited about supporting it. And we've got a lot of other things planned as well, which I probably can't, but, watch this space, Yeah.
You've mentioned the goals now. One of the goals there that they mentioned was to buy less but to feel more. Is this was the concept that you currently mentioned, where it's like they take a photo and you kind of look at something which you've recycled or reused, or somebody else sold it at a thrift shop? Is that feeling the environment, or what exactly does that goal mean? Well, could you explain that concept?
Yeah. So really, this is about. I mean, consumption can be quite mindless. I think, we've all kind of wanted to buy something so badly, and then we get it, and then we're like, so there's a kind of really interesting emotional cycle, like there's a lot of anticipation before you buy something, and then you're on a kind of like high when you get it, but then you sort of decrease your intention, and the thing goes into the back of your wardrobe and you forget about it. So really what this is about is really like making great choices. So it's really about like, do I really love this? Will I wear this more than 30 times? I mean, that's Livia First's rule, which I've always adopted, which is, am I genuinely going to wear this more than 30 times? If not, I'm not going to buy this. So it really is about like, what are the consequences of my buying this? Single pair of jeans uses like thousands of gallons of water, like which could be drunk by somebody, in a water-starved kind of.
It's usually clean water. It's usually
Yeah,
clean drinking water that's
yeah.
used. So it's even been treated. It's gone through a whole process.
Exactly. So, I mean, like, it's weighing up those kind of options, and really what we've looked at is that you can get the same emotional high, if not more, out of buying something vintage or swapping it or something like that, because you've also got that feel-good factor. Like, I really bought something or borrowed it or swapped it, and I feel really good about this because I've made a great choice for the environment. We're not advocating that you buy everything that way, because we also do need to support the fashion industry and the people who are working in it, but it really is about being way more choiceful about what it is that you buy, and being savvy and really using your purpose in your pocket to actually really do that. But it's very exciting, and we created a great video with a whole load of influencers who are all kind of re-wearing and reusing, and that's what we're really trying to encourage, because we need role models and influencers to really do that. Like on red carpets, we need to turn red carpets into green carpets, that kind of stuff, and it needs to be cool. And also, I'm very aware that a lot of the world is already buying secondhand clothes, or swapping them. And we really need to champion those people, that they look mega stylish and really cool. And that, in some parts of the world, there is a bit of, I don't know, like shame about buying clothes that way. And we really need to kind of like champion those people and say, you were doing the right thing all along. This is absolutely amazing. So yeah, so that's the desire. Yeah.
And I mean, in terms of pop culture, it would be absolutely remiss of me not to mention. I mean, the video is old by now, but I at least from my own perspective know that Macklemore's Thrift Store, that song and the music video that came along with it, at the very least was one of those elements where they're kind of in a very, I want to say, very humorous way, champion the idea of it's really cool actually to buy something. And not only do you get a great deal, you get an insane variety that you don't usually do in terms of whatever the hype is. So, maybe more like those is the type of thing that you want it to look, to make it just change the...
Yeah, and also developing your individual style. I mean, why do you want to look like everyone else? I mean, like, you don't want to be a carbon copy of somebody else. And I also think, the younger generations are really getting that. They don't want to look like a clone or anyone else. I am me, like I'm an individual, and I will dress and express myself in the way that I wish to. And I think it gives people a lot more freedom. So I'm really super excited about that.
And I also want to talk about, because I mean, this is so utterly related, especially when you talk about the fashion industry being, I think, like you said, the third largest polluter. There's a lot of other gripes that people actually have with the fashion industry, especially those people that, I mean, like I said, I genuinely do wear this shirt a lot. I have a very little fashion sense in that regard. But I'm saying, there's a lot of people that don't invest that much in fashion, that look at fashion as this type of way that, especially due to the cost of some things, look at the exploitation of the way in which these products are created, especially in regards to, a lot of these products that people buy that are mass marketing available are made for next to nothing by workers in a third world country which aren't being paid a sustainable or living wage. So, there's an environment there, and sweatshops, as the term most commonly goes, that's being used, especially by the larger companies. Could you just give us an idea of, this type of image, how well represented is it in terms of people's in popular media that people know about this, and what is something that people are actually missing about it? Like what are they not seeing in this image?
So yes, I mean, my desire is one day that every product that we ever buy will come with a kind of like a global goals ticket, so you'll actually be able to see how well this performs in terms of environmental measures, but also human measures. And the conditions under which many of our clothes are produced is horrific, even now. And what is even more tragic is that is before the epidemic hit. You know, when the epidemic hit, the first thing many major fashion companies did was stop their orders and or not pay for orders that they had already placed that were on the way. Now, if you think that you know, the hundreds of thousands of garment workers, mainly women as well, live in, you know, countries where they're barely paid a living wage. I mean, they're not. I mean, and it also is kind of like, you know, often akin to some kind of form of modern slavery. You know, they're living a hand-to-mouth existence, you know, to support their families, working in very, very difficult conditions, often in very dangerous conditions as well. And you know, the Rana Plaza collapse, which I think happened in 2013, you know, was a huge moment because it suddenly kind of became very real about what was happening. And you know, that tragedy could be repeated at any moment in parts of the world. So, you know, we cannot underplay the human cost, and that's why I'm saying we can't get to a place where we stop buying clothes because we need to support these people. But you know, and therefore, you know, we really need to look into this. And one of the things, I mean, there's an extraordinary campaign that I would ask everyone to look into called the Pay Up campaign. And I interviewed the founder of this, Aisha, a couple of months ago, and this was literally calling out the major companies to pay up, you know, that, you know, had cancelled their orders or basically taken the orders and never paid. And you know, it's a host of kind of household names that we're all very familiar with. And it's just absolutely shocking that that was done. I understand that people need to protect their businesses, but if you don't pay someone in those countries, they don't eat. You know, their kids go hungry. I mean, and I just find that utterly, utterly appalling. I mean, you know, that there was no empathy or no concern or nothing for these people. And, you know, we need to be incredibly mindful of this. And I think, as, you know, I hate the word consumers, you know, but, you know, we all consume. And what I would really encourage everybody to do is to do their research on where they buy, you know, their fashion, in fact, any product from, because we need to do that. And if you see things which upset you or whatever, call those companies out. You know, they change because we call them out, you know, and we really need that people power. You know, go and buy another brand, call them out, go for it, you know, because eventually they will change. They have to. And, you know, all of these companies are on social media. You know, they all listen, and you know, I mean, they're not going to want to go broke or bust because you know, consumers are calling them out. They're going to have to change, and you are seeing, you know, some of these companies, you know, starting to move towards a sustainability agenda because, you know, yeah, they're listening to their customers and they're like, oh my God, you know. You know, we need to shift, but you know, we all really need to remember how much power we have and to affect this. But you know, you know, it's tragic, and I think if you also, you know, I did an interview with the founder of Outland Denim. You know, if people want to hear more about what slavery looks like. And what a great company is doing to tackle it. Listen to that podcast. It's just, you know, just extraordinary and very humbling. What James is doing is just amazing. Yeah.
And it's actually quite difficult to understand because, like you said, a lot of these people aren't paid a livable wage, and especially in scenarios where the money gets tight or the order is not being paid for, the people that genuinely feel it is usually the part that's the highest cost component for all of these companies, which is the workforce. And so they just simply you know, don't pay the workforce as a way to keep the company alive. And this actually, you know, causes a lot of them, in order, because by definition it's not a livable wage, to do other things that makes ends meet. And therefore there's actually a connection between you know, deplorable situation in which workers are in the fashion industry and human trafficking.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, this is something I wanted to ask you about. Like, what is this connection? How is this connected? And in what way, how did this start even?
Human trafficking is the third biggest illegal industry in the world after drugs and guns. I mean, just to put a cap on it. And I think that a lot of us live in we think it used to happen once upon a time. You know, it's alive, it's real, it's probably happening in a town near you. I mean, it's completely embedded throughout the world. And it's, I mean, for me, it's deeply, deeply shocking. And I really got to know the depth of this issue when I worked for the Body Shop. Anita Roddick's dying wish was for the Body Shop to run a Stop Sex Trafficking of Children and Young People campaign. And, you know, therefore at the Body Shop, I got to learn about this problem and the scale of it very, very, very quickly. And it was just horrifying, absolutely horrifying. I mean, it's the campaign I'm proudest of doing in my life because we really shone a spotlight on it. I mean, we changed legislation in 24 countries, including South Africa, which I'll circle back to. That was a very personal kind of thing. And you know, we created 7 million petitions. You know, it was the largest petition ever to go to the United Nations at the time. And
7 million signatures.
Yeah, and that was, you know, I mean, like, I think we would get many more now because people are so much more media savvy, but we really explained what was going on and also helped people understand that every country was affected by it. This wasn't a kind of developing nation problem. This was every country had this issue. And, you know, I mean, I can remember I found out, like, you know, in London, in my borough where I lived at the time, I spoke to one of you know, somebody who was in the police force, tasked with trafficking. She said there were 36 brothels in my very small area, and a lot of the women in those brothels were trafficked. And you know, human trafficking happens for labour purposes, cheap labour, you know, and we've, you know, it happens in the UK. When there was an example in kind of, I think it was Leeds, you know, they found, or maybe it was Leicester, you know, they found an underground sweatshop full of, you know, illegal immigrants who didn't have their passports. I mean, you know, I volunteered for I'm still involved in an organisation called Glassdoor, you know, which helps homeless people. We would often come across people who had run away from trafficking situations, didn't speak a word of English, had just run away. I mean, it's appalling. And, you know, how can we treat other human beings like that? I mean, I just don't understand it. I just don't get it. And with so little respect and taking away their freedom. I mean, that goes against every kind of human rights, you know, kind of declaration. And it's so upsetting. And, you know, I think it is like, we need to know that transparency. Like, where do those people come from? Are they paid properly? And also appreciate that these people are very frightened. And I mean, one of the moments I sent this extraordinary reporter called Hazel Thompson to South Africa during the time of the World Cup. And because we wanted to really look at what human trafficking really looked like. And she went on police raids to brothels in Cape Town with the police, and she went to one and took photos, and there was this young girl who was, I mean, they were chained to the beds. I mean, chained to the beds and forced to have sex with people. And, you know, in those days, you know, you had to actually kind of declare that you had been trafficked in front of your kidnappers to be released. And there was this one girl who was, I mean, literally rocking backwards and forwards on her bed. She really wanted to leave. She wanted to escape. But these guys had told her that they would kill her family if she tried to run away. And they had to leave her there. I mean, can you imagine? And I think, you know, when Hazel told me the story and we looked at the pictures, I mean, we wept for this girl. And, you know, when we actually introduced the trafficking legislation, you know, the governmental change happened in South Africa, we cried. And we cried for that girl. And I really, you know, I will never forget her as long as I live, you know, and the experiences that people shared with me. And we don't like to ask trafficked victims their stories too often, because every time they tell their stories, they relive the trauma. So it's I mean, and what trauma? I mean, how can we treat another like that?
And it genuinely, the thing that I think, because I initially also was, one of the people that really didn't think that this happened. At least, it's so behind the scenes. I mean, I say this to cover my own ignorance, really, but it is ignorance. Let's be honest. This it's so obscure thought to have that people would be practicing what in reality is just straight up slavery. I mean, there really is no way to sugarcoat it with a nice politically correct term.
It's modern slavery.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and if people think slavery was abolished, I mean, you just have to realize that it wasn't abolished. It changed the name.
Yeah.
It changed the name.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in this scenario, it's phenomenal to think of. The human person, the human individual, is the most valuable resource that you'll have in any single supply chain you could imagine. Every single one. Doesn't matter how automated they get, there will always be a human in the loop because of the amazing capabilities that the human has to adapt and solve a problem. And in this same scenario, for a lot of these companies, a lot of these people that exploit humans in human trafficking, that is exactly what they're working with. And that is why it's such a big industry, and why it's so difficult to fathom that it's such a big industry, because you can't imagine that happening. But no, the human resource is massive, and therefore there'll be a massive industry that supports the exploitation thereof.
Yeah,
it's difficult to fathom.
And also, I mean, before we did the sex trafficking campaign with the Body Shop, we played this extraordinary simulation, which was literally two parents not on a living wage and how they could support their children. It was like an experimental thing. And, one parent falls ill, you don't have health insurance, blah, blah, blah. I mean, not working, unwell, it becomes very easy also, unfortunately, I mean, however horrific, to actually kind of, I can't feed my children, what am I going to do? I'm sick. The system is broken, and we have to really implement the Declaration of Human Rights. We have to pay people a living wage. You cannot be in a situation where you're hopefully giving your child away for a better life. I mean, in valleys in Nepal, there are no girls because they've all, kind of thought that they have sent their daughters off to join the Indian state circles. They end up in brothels in Mumbai. I mean, we cannot allow that to happen. There needs to be deeper education. There needs to be a lot of empathy as well, because I mean, that's an appalling decision for any parent to make. And you see trafficking, whether it's in the cocoa industry, all sorts of things. It's not just sex trafficking, but I mean, you see it quite a lot in parts of Western Africa, and we have to stop this trade. People, healthy, happy, rounded people who are motivated and encouraged to work for companies are unstoppable. And when you have, purpose-led companies where everybody has a purpose in that organization, extraordinary things can happen. And that's where I tend to try and dwell on the positive, but we have to be deeply aware. So do your homework, do your research before you buy anything. Really do that. Yeah.
And the idea of a lot of the companies that we've mentioned now, that we'll put links in the description for people to find, is just so it makes this research easier, because genuinely it really isn't easy enough. I mean, it can be quite difficult to read through, the corporate spin in terms of, how they describe how their supply chain works. So making this more transparent, making it more available is an amazing job that you and all of these other companies do.
Definitely. And I mean, one place to start is obviously to see, are these companies a B Corp or something similar, where there is some kind of level of auditing, which is very good. I mean, I'm not saying that it covers absolutely everything. So do your own research as well, because, I mean, even in Unilever, we found abuse in the tea supply chain in Uganda, which was shocking to all of us. Even in companies that are very well-meaning, these things can happen. So do your research. And I mean, that was a huge shock at Unilever, and it really was a catalyst for helping Unilever change their supply chain and really look at the transparency in the supply chain, so that they had it as well, and I could absolutely ensure that these things weren't happening. And in that example, one of the things they did was make I think over like half of the supervisors female, and that's also where I think greater diversity and inclusion is so important in organizations, because in organizations where you have women things like that don't happen so much, because there is a great deal more empathy, and it's a better balance. Yeah.
But thank you so much for sharing this message and the perspective for us. I just want to give you a last opportunity to add or plug anything you would like to before we end this discussion.
That's very kind of you. Well, thank you for having me. As I said at the beginning, it's very strange to be interviewed rather than to be interviewing. So thank you for making it so easy. But if you'd like to listen to some of the podcasts that I mentioned on my series, you can find me on Start Somewhere, Sara Vaughan, and it's basically on all the usual podcast channels like Amazon, Apple, Stitcher, and stuff like that. So please do listen to them. And the whole thing about the podcast is really to help inspire people really about how to find their purpose and to see what's possible. And a lot of the people that I've interviewed have not been born with a great idea. They've kind of stumbled across it or found it. So also I feel that particularly for young people, they think everyone's got the whole kind of life mapped out. And that's not true. Many people just fall into things or discover them, and I think there's so much pressure on youngsters today to get things right, and it's to give them a bit of inspiration as you go, well, gosh, didn't there was no game plan for this person, so, and really to say, follow your passion, start somewhere, decide what really matters to you, and really make a difference, and really use your purpose in your pocket. What you spend your money on or where you place your attention is so important. So please, that's my genuine request, is like, as you go about your everyday life, just consider and contemplate, like, where did this come from? Who grew it? Who made it? Is the price I'm paying for this? Could that include a sustainable wage? And also, don't forget, living things as well. Like really consider that. About things like mass agriculture is hugely polluting to the industry, but also is extremely cruel. And I think contemplate, how can I be helpful and how can I be kind in an everyday world, because so much cruelty abounds, and I think we need to put a stop to that, and effectively it starts with us.
And it's such a wonderful positive message to end up for. So I just want to thank you for ending up on that. I think it gives people so much more motivation when there's something inspiring and positive to work towards, because there can be a lot of depressing things we talked about that can get people down in the dumps. There's there's hope. There's positivity around it, and you've shared that now.
There is deep hope, and like, as I said earlier, humans and human beings are extremely innovative when you're up against the wall. And I think there is an openness to change now. There is an openness to inclusion, hearing voices from youngsters, like, there's the COP Youth Summit coming up. There is much more interest in inclusion and diversity, whether it's, women, disabled people of color. I mean, that's exciting. And I really feel that we're at the moment in a passage of time where all these appalling abuses are coming to light, so that we can actually do it better and do it differently. And that's the world that I want to create and live in.
Yeah. So thank you so much for joining us. For those of our viewers, of course, that made it this far into the video, if you believe in the message that Sara says, or just want to share this perspective with other people to broaden their worldview, please by all means share this video. It obviously helps out us, and it helps out Sara as well in terms of sharing the message. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you much, Sara, for joining us. This has been WorldView.